The White Sox are shaking up their coaching staff after building momentum going into 2026. Let's discuss with my guest on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan, a contributor for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the fan side of the network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Chicago White Sox Sun-Times beat reporter Kyle Williams sat down with me to discuss the coaching staff shakeup, looking back at the 2025 season and ahead to this offseason, along with some playoff talk. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. All right, Kyle, thanks for joining me. Now, the news just came out, as we're recording, Ethan Katz, Marcus Thames on the outs. Were you kind of surprised that they made these coaching firings?
Yeah, so I was, especially surprised with Ethan, given the reverence that many of the pitchers have for him. I know he's been, lauded throughout the organization and throughout the league just in terms of his work ethic and just how he handles guys. He's very not regimented, but he treats every pitcher differently. So he will make sure it's like check in and have a different plan of attack with each pitcher rather than like an overarching philosophy. And the pitchers really appreciated that hands-on instruction from him and just kind of how he tried to guide everything towards their strengths and get the best out of them. And I thought he did a pretty solid job, given the lack of resources in the bullpen. The starting pitching was inconsistent at best. And so I really do feel like he did the best with that. And then with Marcus, hitting coaches are kind of like coordinators in football, in which you can see them fluctuate and go from, team to team. So I wasn't too surprised to see Marcus, get the axe, just because also Will Venable probably just wants to bring his guys in here. That's just how, regime changes happen. And so it was shocking that Katz, was on that list. But this is pretty like standard fare for, when you have a first year manager and who was kind of given most of these guys last year.
Yeah, I was actually surprised that they fired Katz also because it seemed like the structure, and you know it better than me, is, Bannister was kind of like the swing coach, as he liked to say, for pitchers, kind of with the day-to-day stuff when he would come in. And Katz was more of, the actual in-game prep. And it seemed like that was working where, Thames, it was like, when Will Venable has to say, hey, we got to hit fastballs better, I kind of think that, marked his time being the hitting coach.
Yeah, and then you just look at and then, also then, in the second half, they took off once they, went to that philosophy. But yeah, it's tough when you see this just because of you don't want to speculate too much, especially with the news just coming out today. But there is more to get out of that offense. There's too many times this year. I think back to that Cleveland series where the offense just didn't do enough. There was too many games where one hit, two hits, or just coming up empty with runners in scoring position. And so, I think Getz, especially entering, what's going to be another full year and having this offseason to build with Will and with Josh, I think they're probably just looking at it as like a nice opportunity to make transitions.
Yeah, and I also we can't speculate too much right now, as you're right, but I wonder if they are going to tap into maybe, I know what was it, the Texas Rangers, they let go of the offensive coordinator prior, and, that was a guy that they interviewed. I wonder if Venable wants to tap into him, or again, Ryan Fuller being the director of hitting, does he want to go to more like what the Orioles have done and really complete it by bringing in another person with the ties to the Orioles?
Yeah, everything's on the table, and that's the one thing that the team has gotten right so far, just with their since Getz has taken over, is that they're not afraid to go and, tap somebody from an outside organization to bring them in, interview them, and hire them. The job Ryan Fuller did alone with Colson Montgomery was remarkable. It turned Colson from a guy who many questioned was he going to make the majors to, hitting 20 homers in his rookie year. And so I think all things are on the table. Will's a well-liked and respected guy who's worked for some pretty successful organizations. So I would imagine that he has those connections, Fuller as well. And so It's going to be interesting how they approach it, especially on the pitching side too. With Bannister, I would imagine having a say on the pitching coach and just giving his suggestions here and there. But I mean, overall, it's shocking, but it's also, it's probably right, for to give this new kind of rebuild and regime a fair shake. It's to have bring their guys in and just see how it kind of blossoms over the preceding years.
All right, so let's get into the 2025 season. That's kind of what I wanted to get you on to first talk about it. So, who stood out the most to you this season when it came to, at the plate or on the mound?
Shane Smith turning into an all-star was just something that wasn't on your bingo card. I mean, he wasn't even he wasn't even the opening day starter this year, and he turned into their best pitcher by far, especially best starter. Just kind of his just like dogged mentality and just kind of, his he's never satisfied. Like, he's very hard to please, and so you notice that about him, especially after bad outings. You can tell how it just eats at him on his face, and he's just a competitor. And he's a guy that, who knows how next season fares, but for this year, he was a big win for the front office in terms of just identifying him and acquiring him and getting it done. Then you have a guy like Colson who came up. I mean, like I said earlier, did not expect to see him in the majors, given that they sent him to Arizona to refine some things with Fuller, and then he turns out to be a 20 homer guy, 55 RBIs. So I would say those two definitely stick out. I mean, with honorable mention to Kyle Teal, just in terms of his athleticism on the bases, just his overall acumen, and enthusiasm in the locker room. He's a presence that's hard to miss in the locker room.
Now, do you selfishly feel a little bit cheated that, say, Colson doesn't get hurt in spring training, is the opening day shortstop, and he actually lives up to the projections? What I think he was going to hit like 48 home runs if you spread that out. Like, you feel like, hey, man, I could have covered a 48 home run season this year.
It's hard to, especially in baseball, just because of the rhythms and natures of things. I mean, PCA was on a potential 40-40 tear, and then he hit that lull. So you never truly know. But, just with Colson, it's interesting that, just his journey and just how he's a guy who struggled in the minors, but seemed to acclimate very quickly to the majors. Not every pitcher is every player is like that. So, but no, I mean, they cleared the job out for him. Like, how often is it you see they clear the job out, for him to kind of win and take it? It doesn't happen. He struggles immensely, and then he's able to rebound all in the same season. So those are the type of stories that were, very not shocking, but it made the season interesting.
All right, so how do you think Will Venable did in his first year as the manager?
I thought Will did. I mean, one, the players love playing for him, and I thought he really does a good job of synthesizing like data and like using it in their decision making process. And he's not like a rah guy by any means, but he has the necessary gravitas. So after a big win, he will celebrate with the team. But he's not a big speeches guy. He's a very laid back, chill demeanor. But I just thought he did a pretty, as well as he could in terms of especially managing the pitching staff in the second half. With the injuries, guys going to start, he managed the bullpen. I felt like they got the most out of the bullpen that they probably could have given the circumstances. But yeah, no, I thought overall it was probably a good learning year for Will Venable. I mean, he didn't seem overwhelmed by anything. He seemed pretty prepared just for the processes of things, managing a team, especially with his big league experience. But I thought overall he seems like the guy that's right for this locker room and just right for the team going forward.
All right, more of my conversation with Kyle Williams is coming up after the break as we continue to look back on the 2025 season and ahead to the upcoming offseason. You've probably seen a million ads for hair growth products and thought, sure, like that actually works. There's so many products out there, it's hard to know which ones are actually going to do anything, and that's why you should give Nutrafol a closer look. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand trusted by over 1.5 million people. And now Nutrafol is the official hair growth partner of Major League Baseball. And you can feel great about what you're putting into your body, since Nutrafol hair growth supplements are backed by peer-reviewed studies and NSF content certified, the gold standard and third-party certification for supplements. And I got my hair issues with a big old bald spot, so I can't wait to give Nutrafol a try. And again, I can feel good about using Nutrafol because it's NSF certified and backed by peer-reviewed studies. See thicker, stronger, faster growing hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. And for a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter promo code LOCKEDONMLB. Find out why Nutrafol is the best-selling health growth supplement brand at Nutrafol.com. It is Nutrafol.com, promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code LOCKEDONMLB. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, you can get the audio version of the show on places such as Apple or Spotify. So make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me and maybe some hope. All right, so I got a hypothesis that it's going to be hard to actually measure Will Venable's ability to manage a bullpen just because of his theory of you use your best pitcher in the most high leverage situation that could be in the 7th, 8th, or 9th, but sometimes it is the 7th, 8th, or 9th, and then when you get to the 9th inning, it seemed like a lot of times it was like, and all I got is Brandon Eisert and Steven Wilson left in the chamber, and these guys were they weren't very good in high leverage, so I think they do need to upgrade the bullpen. Is that one of the things that you're thinking, like, hey, I really can't evaluate what Will Venable is going to do as managing a bullpen because I just don't think he has the horses right now?
Yeah, I mean, I would say Grant Taylor is probably the guy who probably was his numbers weren't the prettiest, but he's the guy that, has the prototypical arm to handle being in a bullpen just with his, the right arm, how much velocity he can muster, and just his potential is limitless from an athletic standpoint. But yeah, no, I would agree with that. It's just, there was times when like he would stay away from guys because he knew they were running on fumes, and it's just hard to manage a bullpen when you have to also worry about how many starts are you going to get from your starter realistically. Like the amount of times they had to use a bolt guy or a bullpen, like it was hard. It's hard juggling all of those things, and then you end up with a guy like Mike Vassell, who's also one of the surprise contributors to this team, having to pitch as many innings as he did just because they were short on guys who could give them quality innings. And then so he went from, a bullpen guy to basically their bolt guy for most of the season.
All right, you just mentioned Grant Taylor in the bullpen. There's going to be some folks in the White Sox fandom that are like, no, he's got to be still developed to a starter. But isn't it just like, hey, guys, if his arm is not going to allow him to be a starter, it's fine that he's a high leverage reliever. And it seems like the only thing he has to get rid of out of his game is those, like, excuse me, singles. It seems like he got killed by these reaction swings that would just drop for these bloop hits.
Yeah, no, I talked about that with him, I believe in Detroit. Just he has those like little singles like that would kind of add up to a big inning for him, and was kind of ruin his season numbers or like numbers for a particular month. But no, I mean, I think a lot of him moving to the bullpen was also just him. They wanted to get him through the season healthy. They wanted to make sure that at the end of the day, he ended the season healthy, got the innings, got the experience, and reassess things in the offseason. I've talked to him, and he said he wants to be a starter again. That's one of his goals in the offseason, is to be a starter, to work his way back into that starting rotation. And if like say things don't work out for him as a starter, you still have a valuable bullpen guy, and that's so valuable. Just him being able to impact the team in any way for the White Sox is valuable. And so I agree with you in that if he's just a bullpen guy, but he's one of the best in the game. I mean, you saw what Mason Miller just went for on the trade market as a closer. Like I'm not equating Grant Taylor to Mason Miller, but it's a valuable player to have when you have a guy with just his right arm and just the amount of velocity. It's valuable no matter where he pitches. I mean, obviously we want him to be a starter, but they're in a good spot where he's shown that he can handle the major leagues. It's just about building that consistency, eliminating those bloop hits, like you said. But I mean, he looks like a guy that can be around for this team in a valuable role as they, continue to build and add around him.
Now, I know when I first had you on the show back in April, you said Daryl Van Schouwen was kind of giving you some mentorship, telling you maybe some stories. When he was talking, did he ever talk about like the 2023 clubhouse and how toxic it is? And based on him relaying that to you, what did you see in the 2025 clubhouse? Was it more, obviously, it sounds like it was more harmonious, more everybody was getting along and really pulling, the rope the same way.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot. It was a positive locker room, a positive environment. You would see guys talking with each other before games, whether it's talking about fantasy football, pitching matchups, going over video. Like I've seen Sean Burke and, Martin Perez, Shane Smith, just all huddled together going over pitching stuff on the road. And so it was a very harmonious locker room. Like it was a good locker room environment. Even at 2024, given the infamy of that season, it wasn't a toxic locker room like I've heard from, years prior. Like it was still, even though amidst the long losing stretches, it was still an upbeat locker room for the most part, as upbeat as you can get. And then this year was kind of the same, and as their play improved, you kind of saw the expectations rise from, players. Like they weren't just happy to be in games anymore. They wanted to, do the little things to win those games. And so, and that started with a guy like Michael A. Taylor, who just retired, Martin Perez. Luis even turned into one of those guys who became a clubhouse leader. So when you have that alchemy and just that camaraderie, like that isn't, I always feel that that's important. It's not something you can quantify, but it's important as you go forward, because like the core of those, like, Kyle Teal, Colson Montgomery, Shane Smith, those are all guys that you want on this team when this team is good. So if the team wants those guys to be good, they have to learn from the veterans that they have around them. A guy like Mike Talkman, who was a professional for them to learn from. And so that's going to be important, especially when you're entering a rebuild. One of the most important things is knowing what veterans to bring in, because you want to bring in the right types of veterans and instill the right habits into, young players who may be impressionable. And, what I think Getz and, Josh did a solid job in terms of the veterans they acquired and put around these guys. And, now it's just up to keep adding to that talent and augmenting the roster with more and more talent.
All right. So talking about augmenting the roster, where do you think the White Sox need to hit in the offseason?
Oh, starting pitching. I think I mean, every team's looking for pitching, but especially them, because when you look at it, who can you pencil in for next year in the rotation? You have Shane Smith, you have Davis Martin. Those are the only two that I feel confident in saying you can pencil into the rotation. Martin Perez has a mutual option that, he for $10 million, he may or may not come back. Sean Burke is good in stretches, but how can you rely on him? That's always the thing with Sean, because he's either going to have, a tremendous start like how he ended the year, or, he had too many instances and he would tell you of like 3 innings, 2 innings, 3 and a third inning, 3 and 2/3 innings that like really hurt the bullpen and just kind of hamstrung them. And so I really think you need to get another starter or two possibly to add to that rotation, because you just need guys that can like eat innings and not completely tax the bullpen. The bullpen wasn't the most talented, but they're also one of the most overworked in the majors. And so I really think that played a role in the performance as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate the starting pitching from, whether it is through, trades, waiver claims, the Rule 5 draft, and just adding to that rotation, because that was one of the biggest challenges I think for Will this year, was just the rotation was just constantly in flux due to injuries or performance that, it was hard to kind of set roles and, especially for the bullpen guys, because you never knew when they were going to have to come into the game. I mean, you look at a guy like Jonathan Cannon, promising, first year, some bumps along the road. But, he went from a guy who induced ground balls and weak contact and was going like 6 innings consistently his first year, to this year where he's sent to the minors, comes back and still isn't the guy that we saw the previous year. And so, they have to kind of either bet on guys having bounce back performances or, get some insurance just in case they don't.
Yeah, and they're also going to have to possibly rely on guys coming off Tommy John surgery like Drew Thorpe. I mean, we've completely forgotten about him, but he possibly will be back, but you don't know when. I mean, are they going to be ready by opening day? Are they going to be ready by June? Because with that rehab,
I think he said in an interview with a bunch of the media reporters around, like he wasn't putting a date on it, but like, with Tommy John, somewhere around mid-season is when you can ideally, in everything goes completely correct way, like think about maybe he can return around mid-season. But like you said, it's Tommy John. It's tricky. You never know when a guy's is going to feel right. Even when he does come back, like how does he feel?
All right, more of my conversation with Kyle Williams is coming up after the break, as we'll talk about the upcoming wild card series. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. And FanDuel gives you so many ways to play. You can build parlays, you can try player props, and even follow the live lines during the game. And I've always been saying FanDuel's traditional money lines, over, under, and spreads, they are fun to play. But if you want to win big money or at least double or triple your cash, play the parlays, props, or futures. They are running a same-game parlay for Thursday night's San Francisco and Los Angeles game with Kyron Williams, Christian McCaffrey, Puka Nacua, and Devontae Adams all scoring an anytime touchdown. That is at plus 1453. And if you put, say, $10 on that and it hits, that will pay out $145.36. FanDuel makes watching football even more exciting when you got a little something riding on the action. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcasts, as this show's available on all major podcast platforms. Yeah, and I think Davis Martin came back in like 13, 14 months, but like you said, yeah, some guys, it takes them the 18 to 24 months. Some guys, it takes the year. You just never know. So I agree with you on that one. The one thing, and it's kind of breaking my rule, because I never want to see them spending too much money on the bullpen ever again because of how the limited payrolls have always been. But I wouldn't mind them tapping into maybe that 1 year deal and a club option market, because those are the guys that you could potentially flip. And there might be some guys looking on bounce back deals, like Devin Williams had a terrible year in New York. Maybe he's on a bounce back deal, that type of stuff. So I wouldn't mind them seeing that, because then you could also flip those guys at the trade deadline, because as you saw, Mason Miller, not saying that, they could get a guy like that, but that was a huge trade load that the Padres gave up to get him, and other teams have gotten really good returns at the trade deadline with those bullpen arms.
Yeah, I mean, buying low on guys for bounce back is what they should be doing. I mean, just if they invest in the bullpen at all, I'm not sure. Just like, because even you see, the crosstown rival, the Cubs, they don't really invest in the bullpen heavily. I mean, aside from the Tanner Scott deal, but look at their bullpen. It's littered with an ex-White Sox, Brad Kettler, is Drew Pomeranz, Caleb Theobar. Like, it's littered with guys who you wouldn't think of as like valuable, late innings guys, but they were able to find them, turn them into the right, get the most out of them like they were able to. And so that's why the pitching coach is also going to be an important factor when discussing the White Sox and just, the bullpen, because Ethan had a trust with the bullpen guys. And so getting somebody who can like replicate that trust and attention to detail is going to be key for them, just as they continue to like build this thing out. But I mean, I'm with you. Like, a guy like Devin Williams is the perfect candidate if you were to spend money. I don't know if I would spend the money on this is just me talking for me. I don't know if I would spend the money on a bullpen arm. I think I would spend more money on, like, they need some power in the lineup desperately aside from Colson. And so I would spend money just trying to get another bat to kind of help, lengthen out the lineup. But, a guy like Devin Williams is a perfect bounce back candidate because he's shown he can be an all-star in the past. Maybe being in a lower key environment than, the New York Yankees would help him.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind a power bat over, a power bullpen arm either. I'm just saying that this would just be my exception for the, this offseason, 2027, don't invest that much, because you should be developing the arms. And like, I liked how you brought that up. Like, I think process wise too, like, I'd like to see Brian Bannister and the minor league coaching staff work more with the minor league guys to develop them, and the starters, where, maybe the pitching coach, that should definitely be getting the starters prepared for the game, but then also working with the bullpen. So then Bannister can really focus in on developing the talent.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, the one thing is, do you have an idea, like just a best guess of what you think the payroll might be, or did you get any off the record hints at what you're thinking next year's payroll going to look like?
I have not gotten any hints on like what the payroll is. And it's also just yet to add in the looming transition of power over everything. So it's like, in that press release, it said there's gonna be cash infusions over the next preceding years. And so what does that mean? I truthfully don't know. But I mean, I don't think they're going to like break, because I believe they're going to pick up Luis Roberts' option. I mean, Chris has not given any indication otherwise on the record that he intends not to pick up that option. how much money is left after that is, is up for discussion, up for debate. I mean, I know for a fact they have around, I believe it's 41 million in terms of like contract totals committed for next year. But I have not heard about like what the payroll is going to be, how flexible it is. But I mean, this is a big offseason though to see what is it going to be like. What is the spending going to be like? How much do they spend? What do they spend on? So this is going to be a important offseason just in figuring that stuff out. Whereas last year, coming off of 121, it was just more so about improving the young talent, trading Crochet. So that's something I'm going to be keeping my mind on is like what names are they also linked to?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I mean, if you exercise Perez's option, even then you're only at, I think, what is it, 47.1 million. So say, to get to 89, I think that was the opening day start payroll at the beginning. You could chase after a couple $10 million guys, like you said, for a starter. I mean, that's a nice price to get a decent starter to eat some innings and flip at the deadline, that type of stuff. So, I'm kind of looking forward to that. So I know you're going to be helping out with some Cubs coverage. So first of all, everybody, make sure to get a Chicago Sun-Times subscription or donate, for that, because Kyle and all the gang, they do a great job. But how far do you think the Cubs are going to go in the playoffs? Is this kind of a 2-game and they're done, or who knows? Because it's the playoffs.
It is the it's so tough to say just given the state of the offense. They're so up and down. I'm gonna say they win the wild card round. I'm gonna say that. But then NLDS is gonna be tough because I believe they would play the Brewers, if I'm not mistaken. And we all know how the Brewers do with the Cubs, but it's just gonna come down to the offense and just which version do we get? Do we get the kind that was lighting the league on fire in the first, couple of months of the season? Or do we get the kind that was, kind of listless at times? And, but I think the way they ended the season, Seiya getting hot, Michael Bush, kind of the underrated guy of the group with 34 homers. And there's a lot of talent in that lineup. It's just a matter of like, will they get the most out of it, especially at Wrigley Field? I mean, they're going to need it too, just with no Cade Horton, him being sidelined. But yeah, I'm going to go with the Cubs. That's my prediction for the wild card round. I mean, it's going to be tough though. They're going to need to get some damage off of the starters for the Padres just because of how lethal their bullpen is.
All right, so you're going to be going from covering a 102 loss team to covering playoff baseball. How do you switch that? And like, are you going to be like, I know you saw contending teams, but you were focusing on the White Sox. Now you got to focus on like, hey, winning team. I mean, how's that? How do you do that magic there?
It's a lot more focused on, the on-field results. I want to say, like, obviously, when you're covering the White Sox, the on-field results matter, but it's also more so about who are the guys that are going to matter when the team is good again? Like, who are the key components of the rebuild and how are they developing? Versus, with the Cubs, it's all about Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Like all of everything else, you can do like, oh, how much PCA developed. Those stories can get written in the offseason. It's about did they win or did they lose? How did they win? How did they lose? Like it's time, it's playoff time. It's win or go home. And so you have to like really flip and think about, okay, are they going to win? Are they going to lose? Are they struggling? Who is struggling? And, like Council said, if they lose game one, everybody's on deck for game two. So that kind of tells you about just the mindset that they have and just kind of the mindset to bring to the coverage. It's like, it's win or go home. There's no positive to them losing in the wild card round or in the playoffs in general.
All right, finally, who's going to win the whole thing just based on your hunch?
Ooh, that's a tough one. That is a tough one. You know, I would I'm not gonna say the Dodgers. Everybody says the Dodgers. I'm gonna go I'm gonna go with the I'm gonna go with the Blue Jays. Yeah, I'm gonna go with the Blue Jays. I think just the consistency, Boba Fett having that bounce back year, and I kind of like their side of the bracket. First in the ALDS, I believe they'd play the winner of Boston and New York, which I don't think either of those teams are world beaters by any means. And then, facing the winner of Seattle and whoever wins between the, Tigers and the Guardians. I think that's a favorable matchup. I mean, there's no dominant team this year. I mean, unless you disagree with me, but I just don't feel that there's a evil like the Death Stars or any team that's like completely star-studded that they're gonna just, run rum shot through the playoffs. Like, I just really think it's a year in which you could see multiple teams ideally have a shot, but I'm gonna go with the Blue Jays.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see. I mean, the National League, it's really hard to even see who's going to come out of that because it seems tough right there.
Yeah.
And I think you're right with the path. I definitely see. I can see the Blue Jays getting into the World Series like you outlined it, and they've got getting Shane Bieber. That was a
He's
huge
been
boost to
huge.
them. So I mean, yeah, I could see that happening. I mean, what I really want to see though, just to make Major League Baseball, Rob Manfred lose his mind. Let's see a Brewers Blue Jays World Series. Let's see the smallest market team versus a Canadian team. That would
Oh,
just make everybody go nuts. And I know I just want to see the Brewers win a playoff series. They haven't won a playoff series since 2018. That's my second team. I live a few exits away. It'd be just nice to see them win a playoff series.
I mean, them beating the Cubs in the NLDS, if the Cubs were to advance, would be great dealer, to see on Cubs Twitter. Like, I can only imagine the meltdown that would happen if the team that they've been trying to usurp for the better part of, probably the last decade, but especially once they hired Craig Counsell away, and just still after having the NL Central seemingly in their grasp, and then the Brewers coming out and just taking away like Lucy and Peanuts and like, so it would be cool to see just like the Brewers and Cubs match up in a postseason series, because the storylines write themselves at that point. I don't root for a team, but I root for stories and storylines. And Cubs Brewers and the NLDS would be great storytelling and a great rivalry to see unfold.
Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, until a World Series champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. And I'll be back tomorrow with a Way Back Wednesday segment and discuss who the hitter of the year was, in my opinion. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion on the episode page on YouTube via email, lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com, or you can leave them at X, formerly Twitter, at LockedOnSox or at Todd J. Dub. Also, make sure to like today's episode on YouTube or leave a 5-star review at wherever you get your podcast. Have a great day, and I will talk to you tomorrow.